We can now bring in Frank Ledwidge, former British military intelligence officer and senior lecturer in strategy at Portsmouth University. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Now, Donald Trump was not too keen on fresh military support for Kyiv, but what the White House has announced, this halt, was promised under the previous administration of Joe Biden. How will this move affect this summer offensive that's underway?
Well, good afternoon, Delano. The context of this is it's quite long running. The US Armed Forces are very concerned about the depletion of stocks, particularly of anti-aircraft stocks for the Western Pacific theater, and they anticipate that to be the main focus. So that's the background to this. I think that advocacy's got through to the White House now. But as to your question about the effect on the front line, the answer is the restriction of artillery rounds and, to a lesser extent, anti-aircraft air-to-air rounds. Yes, that will probably have an impact, but I suspect Europe too can make up some of that. The real initial impact there, as Emmanuel hinted, was on ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. The only counter, or the only effective counter that Ukraine has at the moment to those, is the PAC-3 Patriot systems. And those rockets, or interceptors as they're called, many of them were diverted away to the Middle East theatre anyway recently. The only backfill for that actually is a French system, the SAMP-T or the Aster-30. Now, there are SAMP-T systems in Ukraine, but I suspect they're not very well provisioned at the moment with ammunition. There aren't many of them. So the Patriot is a real loss, particularly in the context of defending high-value targets against Russian ballistic and hypersonic missiles.
So from what you're suggesting, there are European alternatives in place, from what I understand?
Nobody knows, and nor should they know, how many launchers there are in Ukraine. I think they do have some SAMP-T, as Emmanuel said. Their Iris-T they've also got, which is a slightly different system, a slightly shorter range system. They're not as prevalent as the Patriots, which have dominated that high-end air defense facility or capability of the Ukrainians so far. The SAMP-T systems aren't as numerous anyway in Europe as the Patriots, which the Ukrainians found it very difficult to get hold of. Open sources say they've only got 8 batteries, which is about 24 launches anyway. So, it's a limited supply in any event. So conceivably there could be replacements, but I suspect not in anything like the bulk or quantity needed.
Because since this war has continued to progress, we've, of course, seen Ukraine that has come out with this drone technology. It's sort of been at the forefront of drone technology, so to speak, like Iran has and other parts of the world. But could potentially Ukraine start manufacturing these weapons that America is not going to supply them now? Or will that take too long?
I think it's going to take a long time to develop something like an Aster-30, which is the SAMP-T missile, or the Patriot PAC-3. That's a long-term project. But, the Ukrainians have surprised us before in other respects, notably, as you say, drones and recently cruise missiles, very small-scale cruise missiles, rather impressive capability that.
Now, the U.S. has not announced a halt in intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Could that be next, do you think?
I don't know. It may well be. I doubt it, though. That would be a really, really serious move, and that would be, whilst I would hesitate to say a game changer, it would change things at the front. Ukrainian targeting depends, particularly behind the line, sort of long-range targeting, depends to a very great degree on US intelligence sharing. And the secret source behind all of Ukraine's capabilities, or at least artillery, drones, and communications, is Starlink. That would be the real disaster. I don't see that happening. Intelligence, surveillance, and so forth, I see that continuing. It would be very major if that were removed, and certainly Europe couldn't backfill that in any way.
Because Russia seems to have welcomed this move from Washington, saying it will help usher in the end of the war. What do you make of that statement?
Yes, well, they would, wouldn't they? It won't usher in the end of the war. That only a ceasefire can do that, and a ceasefire following a great deal more pressure, I think, than the Ukrainians are currently under. But it doesn't help the Ukrainians, there's no doubt about that. Presents dilemmas for Europeans, not least because Europe's ammunition buckets are drying up as well, just like the Americans, and they have to look to the future too.
So I know you said we don't know how many stocks Ukraine has, given that it's a war and there's, of course, secrecy and stuff. So based on what you're seeing right now, who has the upper hand as things stand?
The front line is moving the wrong way from Ukraine's perspective. And more importantly, Russia's numbers are beginning to tell on that front as Russia uses its overwhelming preponderance in numbers and reserves to probe at different points of the front, presenting Ukrainian commanders with some very real problems and dilemmas as to which front to prioritize. Right now, on the front, the Russians have the upper hand, there's no doubt about that. The Ukrainians, though, are not breaking. I don't see that happening. So it's in the balance at the moment. This summer won't be decisive, but it will be very important. Right now, Russian numbers are telling, there's no question about that. But Ukraine has the most important component here, which is the moral component. They're defending their own land, but we have to be realistic. The preponderance of numbers is in Russia's favor in the medium and long term.
You're saying we have to be realistic. Should that mean there needs to be a switch from whether Ukraine can actually achieve anything on the battlefield to let's put more weight into diplomacy? Because that's what we're seeing the US try to do.
Well, you're asking my opinion. I think that the answer to that question is yes. We should be doing that. It's highly unlikely. Well, let's put it another way. Militarily, there's no way that is currently visible to me whereby Ukraine is going to be recovering any large areas of its territory. It's only going to be continuing to retreat, which is the wise thing to do in the circumstances, trading land for time. Not much land, by the way. The Russians are moving very slowly. But this is the center of gravity here is attrition, it's numbers, and Russia has and will continue to have that advantage. In those circumstances, and I think Ukraine is right in this respect, it is focusing on ceasefire as a priority. We're getting to political territory here now. I think that's probably the wise way to go at the moment.
Because, Frank, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you recall, there was that Operation Spiderweb, which was hugely successful for Kyiv. Big morale boost. They managed to strike deep inside Russian territory. Then, of course, they tried to get that bridge connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland. What did these operations achieve besides embarrass Moscow?
You hit the nail on the head there, Delano, when you mentioned they were great PR successes. They were narrative successes. The Operation Spider's Web against the bombers destroyed the equivalent of a squadron of bombers. That's not a strategic strike as such. The strategic element was that they did so far behind Russian lines at a Russian strategic asset. But Russia still retains the capability of those aircraft, still retains probably about 90% of them. As for the Kerch Bridge, I'm afraid, no. This is the third or fourth time the Ukrainians had to go at that. They've failed every time. And in any event, the Russians have created alternative routes in there. But notwithstanding that, I think the biggest success actually recently of the Ukrainians, less trumpeted, was the destruction of an S-400 system in Crimea. They don't have many of those in the area. The Russians are very important, and demonstrating that capability that was very important. But look, all of these are single operations. As I said, the center of gravity for this war is the grinding attritional battle at the front. It's not these special forces operations. It never is in war. It's not these single strikes. The center of gravity is manpower, it's casualties, it's attrition. And Ukraine is at the wrong end of that right now.
Frank Ledwidge, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you, Dylan.